What would you do if you saw two well-dressed black children in school uniforms being pulled out of first class while hundreds of eyes watched? No one asked if they had tickets. No one checked the system. Just a cold statement. These seats aren't for you. What would you think if you found out it wasn't a mistake? And what if I told you that the father of those two children, the man sitting silently at the boarding gate, watching his kids be humiliated, was actually the CEO of that airline? There were no shouts. No one slammed a desk in protest. But within the next 72 hours, the entire board of directors was summoned, an internal order was triggered, and a buried truth was exposed, forcing America to confront one question: who really gets to sit in that seat? This isn't just a story about a flight. It's about dignity, and about two children pulled from first class because they didn't look like someone who belongs there. Malik stood in front of the mirror, inspecting the collar of his shirt for the third time, trying to smooth out the fold perfectly. He had never been the kind to fuss over small details, but that morning, on a sunlit July day, everything seemed to matter more than usual. Outside the second-story window, the early Dallas sunlight filtered through the leaves of the Japanese bamboo, casting light on the thick green lawn and the silver SUV parked quietly, as if awaiting a signal to depart. In the room next door, Maya was also adjusting her bangs, pulling up the collar of her navy blue blazer, a piece she had chosen carefully for the journey to the Stanford Summer Scholars Program. Not to impress, but because she knew someone would judge her based on how she boarded the plane. The 17-year-old twins had just received scholarships to one of the most prestigious summer programs in the country. Stanford wasn't just a name, it was a symbol of opportunity, a first step out of the harsh lens the world puts on black people. Malik had said that once during a school presentation, and Maya had stood backstage nodding, as if he'd finally spoken something she'd always believed but never said aloud. Downstairs, the kitchen of the Holt household was as warm as ever. The smell of toast, fresh brewed coffee, and the quiet hum of the morning news on the radio filled the space. Chancellor Holt, a tall man with a calm but firm gait, was slicing the last pieces of fruit to place on the kids' plates. He wasn't wearing a button-up like he usually did. Today he had chosen a plain charcoal crewneck sweater, oddly simple, as if he was deliberately blending into the ordinariness he had spent years avoiding. "All set," he said as the twins walked in. "The final meal before my two geniuses leave the nest." Maya sat down, unfolded her napkin, and glanced at Malik, who was already sneaking a bite of pancake before anyone could stop him. She chuckled quietly, just enough to soften the overly formal mood hanging in the air. "I thought you'd make this more ceremonial," Malik said through a mouthful. "At least balloons or a banner saying, 'Good luck, Stanford.' Something like that." "Unnecessary," Chancellor replied. "Stanford should be the one hanging up welcome signs for you." His voice was calm, unpretentious, but within it was a pride he didn't try to hide. Over the years, he had carried everything to bring these two to this moment, from grueling management consulting work with Fortune 500 companies to being a father, a mother, a friend, and a rock, all by himself. And now he was about to officially become CEO of Aurora Skyways, the third largest airline in the U.S. But he hadn't told anyone, not even his own kids. "There's one more thing," Chancellor said, pulling two cream-colored envelopes from his jacket pocket. "An early graduation gift." Maya and Malik exchanged confused looks. Malik opened his first. His eyes instantly widened. Maya looked down at the envelope in her hands, the Aurora Skyways logo embossed in silver, with the words, "Boarding Pass, First Class" beneath it. "No way," Maya whispered. "First class? How much did you pay for this?" Malik asked, half joking, half worried. "Did you pawn your Uber Eats account?" "Relax," Chancellor chuckled. "I have certain connections. Got a little preferential treatment." Neither of the kids knew that, in Aurora's internal system, Chancellor had just been registered as incoming CEO with top-tier access. He had booked the seats for his children himself as a quiet gift for their new beginning. "We don't even know what to say," Maya began. "No need to say anything, but there's one thing I need you both to remember." The room fell silent. Maya and Malik instinctively straightened in their seats. "I know you have the strength to walk into any room," Chancellor said slowly, "but the world doesn't always see that. It only sees your skin, your clothes, your hair. Sometimes it sees fear, sometimes it sees judgment. Maya nodded. Malik looked down at his coffee cup. And when that happens, he said, you must remember, no one can take away the value you create. You don't need to shout. You don't need to fight. Just stand still and let the truth do the rest. No one said anything for a moment. Then Maya spoke very softly. We understand. The farewell was simple. No tears. Just a long, firm hug from a father who had always been a man of few words. Maya and Malik got into the waiting car. Chancellor watched from the window, lips pressed tight. He wasn't going far. His first meeting at Aurora's Dallas headquarters would start in 3 hours, less than 15 minutes away. But he wanted the kids to believe he was sending them off somewhere distant, so they could learn to stand on their own, just as he had at 19, when no one was left to hold the door open for him. In the back seat, Malik turned to his sister. Hey, Maya, he said, do you feel weird wearing a blazer on a plane? Number. But you look like a lost rapper at a finance convention, she replied, eyeing his limited edition sneakers. They laughed. Not loudly, but it was the one sound the outside world could never take away. And they had no idea that laughter would soon be replaced by very different sounds. Dragging, struggling, the sound of blood dripping onto leather seats. But for now, Dallas was still bright. The plane was still waiting, and the world temporarily had no idea who the father of the two teens walking toward Gate 5 really was. Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport on a summer morning was nothing short of a storm of dress shirts and takeaway coffee. The crowd moved as if hypnotized by flight schedules, dragging suitcases, smartwatches, and artificially busy expressions. Maya and Malik stepped into the main terminal, each pushing a medium-sized suitcase, backpack strapped on, packed with academic documents and a few sets of summer clothes. They stopped at the large electronic board to confirm their gate. Malik pointed toward the line that read, Aurora Skyways, Flight 471, SJC, Gate B5. Maya nodded, no words, partly to conserve energy for the long journey, but partly because they had begun to feel the stares. Not just the usual curious glances, but the kind of cold, tilted looks, subtly evaluative, then quietly turned away. Their presence, two well-dressed black teenagers entering the first-class check-in area, suddenly felt like a wrong note in a symphony of elite travelers. The first sign of difference didn't come from words, but from the eyes of the woman behind the check-in counter. Her gaze moved from Malik to Maya to the tickets on their phones, then back to Malik's eyes as if waiting for him to explain. No greeting, no smile, not even the customary "have a safe flight." She scanned the tickets, nodded, and pointed silently toward the security checkpoint. At the TSA station, the line slowed. The man in front, a white middle-aged guy in a thin gray suit, was digging through his bag for his ID while apologizing for wasting time. The security officer smiled, nodded, and waved him through. When it was Maya and Malik's turn, the smile disappeared. IDs, the officer said flatly. Malik pulled out his wallet and handed over a student ID and a temporary Texas driver's license. Maya did the same. The officer took them, turned them sideways, checked the watermark, flashed a laser light. He didn't look at them. He looked at the documents as if waiting for them to confess something was wrong. This is a temporary ID? No, sir. It's a standard Texas driver's license, Maya replied calmly. Looks like it was printed recently. My son just turned the legal driving age, a woman behind them interjected. She looked at Malik with a blend of curiosity and caution. The officer glanced at Maya, then Malik, then back to the IDs before slowly nodding. No apology, no explanation. Just a hand gesture toward the bag scanner. The two quietly gathered their belongings. Malik glanced at his sister. Maya said nothing, but her eyes said it all. How many times has this happened now? As they passed through duty-free, the stares returned. A woman standing at the perfume counter was clearly watching them. No greeting, no invitation to sample, just a fixed stare. Nearby, a white couple in athletic wear tried on sunglasses. No one looked twice at them. Feels like we're somewhere we're not supposed to be, Malik murmured. We have tickets, a valid reason, a purpose. We belong here, Maya answered, her voice low and firm. You're always that sure? Number. But if you don't believe it first, who will? At Gate B5, the atmosphere shifted. The seats were filled with business people, laptops open, suits crisp, hard-shell luggage gleaming. Malik pulled a chair between two men discussing stock options. Maya checked her phone for an email from the Stanford program. She had just received an update. The research team she applied to had selected her to deliver the final presentation. Just reading the first line made her heart race. "Good news?" Malik asked. "Stanford picked me to lead the main research group," she said, unable to hide her excitement. "That's awesome. But are you sure they don't think you're someone's daughter? You think Stanford picks students based on family ties?" But clearly, a lot of people around here think we're sitting here because someone else messed up." Before Maya could respond, the boarding announcement came over the speakers. First-class passengers were invited to board. Maya and Malik stood, presenting their digital tickets. The gate agent, a middle-aged woman with short hair, looked at them and smiled warmly. "Welcome, both of you. First time flying first class?" "Yes," Maya answered, her eyes lighting up a bit. "That's wonderful. You're in seats 2A and 2B, right in the front row. Make yourselves comfortable." That welcome felt like a breeze from another world. Malik nudged Maya gently. "You see that? Someone who knows how to smile." "Don't get your hopes up too soon," Maya replied, though her eyes also flickered with hope. As they walked down the jet bridge, Maya took out her phone and sent a quick message to their father. "Boarding now. Thank you, Dad. Love you." 10 miles away, Chancellor Holt was stepping into the reception lobby of Aurora Skyways, preparing for his first official meeting as CEO. He hadn't seen the message yet, but something in his expression seemed lighter, as if, though unaware of the specifics, a father's instinct had whispered, "Today will not be an ordinary day." As they passed through duty-free, the stares returned. A woman standing at the perfume counter was clearly watching them. No greeting, no invitation to sample, just a fixed stare. Nearby, a white couple in athletic wear tried on sunglasses. No one looked twice at them. "Feels like we're somewhere we're not supposed to be," Malik murmured. "We have tickets, a valid reason, a purpose. We belong here," Maya answered, her voice low and firm. "You're always that sure?" But if you don't believe it first, who will? At Gate B5, the atmosphere shifted. The seats were filled with business people, laptops open, suits crisp, hard-shell luggage gleaming. Malik pulled a chair between two men discussing stock options. Maya checked her phone for an email from the Stanford program. She had just received an update. The research team she applied to had selected her to deliver the final presentation. Just reading the first line made her heart race. "Good news?" Malik asked. "Stanford picked me to lead the main research group," she said, unable to hide her excitement. "That's awesome. But are you sure they don't think you're someone's daughter? You think Stanford picks students based on family ties?" But clearly, a lot of people around here think we're sitting here because someone else messed up. Before Maya could respond, the boarding announcement came over the speakers. First-class passengers were invited to board. Maya and Malik stood, presenting their digital tickets. The gate agent, a middle-aged woman with short hair, looked at them and smiled warmly. "Welcome, both of you. First time flying first class?" "Yes," Maya answered, her eyes lighting up a bit. "That's wonderful. You're in seats 2A and 2B, right in the front row. Make yourselves comfortable." That welcome felt like a breeze from another world. Malik nudged Maya gently. "You see that? Someone who knows how to smile." "Don't get your hopes up too soon," Maya replied, though her eyes also flickered with hope. As they walked down the jet bridge, Maya took out her phone and sent a quick message to their father. "Boarding now. Thank you, Dad. Love you." 10 miles away, Chancellor Holt was stepping into the reception lobby of Aurora Skyways, preparing for his first official meeting as CEO. He hadn't seen the message yet, but something in his expression seemed lighter. As if, though unaware of the specifics, a father's instinct had whispered, "Today will not be an ordinary day." "Is every first-class passenger being asked that?" Malik asked, not confrontational but clear. "We verify when necessary," Heather answered, her voice tightening like a noose. Maya and Malik handed over their IDs. The attendant inspected them thoroughly, eyes scanning every detail. In the row ahead, The man with the magazine, now put away, scoffed and said to his seatmate, "These seats are $4 grand each. Can't imagine how those kids—" Never mind. Heather handed the IDs back, nodded begrudgingly. "Seems correct, but I'll still double-check with the gate." This time Maya didn't respond. She opened her phone and began jotting down everything that had happened. Malik stared out the window. His jaw was set. Their father had taught them not to react immediately, not to get angry, not to give anyone an excuse to label their actions as disturbance. 5 minutes later, Heather returned, this time with another flight attendant. The second woman was younger, black hair tied back, face slightly tense. Heather spoke quickly. "There seems to be a mix-up with the tickets. The system may have auto-upgraded incorrectly. We'll need to reassign you to economy." "That's not possible," Maya responded instantly. "Our father purchased these tickets outright. There was no auto-upgrade." "Sometimes technical errors happen," Heather said. "We'll assist you with the new seating arrangement." "First class isn't full. There are empty seats," Malik pointed out. "We have valid tickets. Our IDs have been verified. A system error isn't a valid reason to force us to move." Another passenger joined in, the man in the gray suit, now clearly visible with a name tag. Frank Delaney, CEO, DFI Capital. "Some people think they can hustle their way into first class, but reality speaks for itself. They don't belong in this space." Malik turned his head. "Are you talking about us?" "Take it how you want," Frank replied, pulling out his phone and beginning to type something. Heather, encouraged by the support, stood firmer. "Let me repeat. If you don't comply, we'll be forced to involve airport security." "On what grounds?" Maya asked. "We're in our assigned seats, with valid tickets and IDs. We've caused no disruption." "Your tone is making other passengers uncomfortable," Heather replied. "Uncomfortable because of our tone, or our skin color?" Malik asked, letting the first edge of emotion show in his voice. Heather turned away and pulled out her phone. "I'll be contacting security." Maya opened the emergency locator app their father had installed on both phones, intended only for dangerous situations. With one tap, their GPS location and an emergency alert were sent directly to Chancellor Holt's device. She whispered to her brother, "Dad will know." Malik nodded, but his eyes stayed locked on Heather, now calling someone, back straight, voice cold like a machine. She was speaking the language of authority, but she had forgotten one thing. This time, the real power didn't belong to her. Heavy footsteps echoed from the front of the cabin. 2 airport security officers appeared. Gray-black uniforms, name tags pinned to their left shoulders. One of them, Briggs, was tall, bald, with cold eyes. The other, younger, named Carson, had a trace of hesitation in his expression as he looked at the 2 black teenagers, slim and silent, seated in 2A and 2B. Heather stepped forward, wasting no time to play the victim. "Here," she said, pointing. "They refused to move when asked, did not cooperate with the flight crew, displayed behavior that disrupted cabin operations." Briggs said nothing. He simply tilted his head toward Maya and Malik, voice dry. "Stand up. Grab your bags. Come with us." Malik tightened his grip on his backpack. Maya didn't move. She looked straight at the officer, not defiantly, but without flinching. "Reason?" she asked. Briggs frowned. "Follow the instruction first. The reason will be given afterward." "We have first-class tickets," Maya said, her voice steady as if reciting from a law textbook. "Our identities have been verified. We're not causing a disturbance. And right now, we're seated exactly where we're supposed to be, paid for with real money, not snuck in, not forged. If you want to remove 2 underage students from this plane simply because we don't look like what you expected, just say it." Carson shifted his stance. Briggs remained stone-faced. "We're not here to debate." "Then what are you here to do? Use force to drag kids out of first class? Seats we paid for?" Malik spoke up, breaking his silence. His voice wasn't loud, but it filled the cabin just enough for everyone to hear. Frank Delaney scoffed, shaking his head. "Kids these days learn how to flip a narrative before they even finish 12th grade. Truly, a modern era." "Do you have something to say to me?" Maya asked, locking eyes with the man for the first time. "Or are you only brave when hiding behind your words?" Frank chuckled. "Disrespect isn't a ticket to sit in this cabin." Heather interjected. I am instructing you to comply immediately. If not, the security team will use enforcement measures. Briggs stepped forward. Carson remained behind, eyes drifting elsewhere. Maya pulled out her phone, opened the camera, and began recording. I'm documenting everything. If there's any behavior that crosses the line, we'll send it straight to our attorney. Heather sneered. Record all you want. It won't help if you don't understand aviation law. And you should remember, Malik added, Aurora Skyways commercial flights are under the jurisdiction of the National Transportation Safety Board, the FAA, and public media. Discrimination in public transport isn't as easy to hide as it was in 1962. Briggs paused. Carson spoke for the first time. Maybe we should contact ground operations again. Re-verify the tickets thoroughly. It looks like the passengers have valid grounds. Heather turned sharply, visibly annoyed. There's no need to hesitate. They're clearly stalling. Then she lowered her voice, but not enough to keep the cabin from hearing. They know they don't belong here. They're just playing the victim. Maya bit her lip. Malik lowered his head. In that brief moment, the air seemed frozen. No one in the cabin spoke. No passenger said, "Wait, this feels wrong." No one placed a hand on Heather's shoulder and told her to stop. No one, except a woman in row 5. A black woman, middle-aged, wearing a dark suit, hair in a tight bun, slim glasses and eyes like X-rays. She stood, pulled out her wallet, and walked toward 2A and 2B. "They're my nieces and nephew," she said. "I purchased the tickets. If there's a problem, take it up with me." Maya turned, stunned. Malik furrowed his brow. "You're—" She smiled gently, then faced Heather. "If you have an issue with skin color, then I'm sorry. But your airline needs to retrain its entire flight crew." Heather stammered. I didn't mean—" "Don't deny what the whole cabin heard," the woman said, then pulled a card from her coat pocket. Clarice Jordan, Federal Oversight Council for Aviation Civil Rights. Heather looked like the breath had been knocked out of her. Briggs looked at Clarice, then at Carson, then at the 2 teenagers. In that quiet instant, everything paused again. Then Briggs spoke, no longer with the same edge. "I'll request another verification. Let's all remain calm." Malik exhaled. Maya turned to Clarice. "Do you know our father?" "Never met him," Clarice replied. "But I know what a face looks like when it's being judged. And it doesn't belong on any flight. Ever." Heather stepped back, gripping her clipboard, trying to hold on to the last shred of dignity. Frank Delaney said nothing. Carson breathed easier. A few other passengers turned away, pretending they hadn't been watching. Maya whispered, "Dad will find out about this." And at that exact moment, 15 miles away, in the boardroom at Aurora Skyways headquarters, Chancellor Holt picked up his phone after its 3rd vibration. The screen read, "Emergency alert from Maya Holt. Cabin 2A, Flight 471. His face changed. It went cold, but not with rage. It was the calm of a storm forming in the mind of someone who understands real power, when you know you can act, and choose precisely when. He stood in the middle of the boardroom, among senior executives presenting their new media strategy for the quarter. "Apologies. The meeting is adjourned. There's something I need to handle personally." The door of the boardroom closed behind Chancellor Holt with a cold finality, cutting off all the chatter inside where the executive board still had no idea what had just happened. There was no explanation, not even a glance of permission. He had simply stood up the moment he received the alert signal from the internal warning system. One custom built exclusively for his twins. A system not many even knew existed. It wasn't a commercial app, nor a tracking software. It was a line of code embedded into his private communication device, connected via satellite, designed for situations he defined as, "When the world refuses to see my children, their father must." Chancellor moved quickly through the 3rd-floor hallway, each step oddly silent. Staff on both sides stepped aside instinctively. No one dared block his path. One assistant tried to catch up, but was halted by a firm nod that said clearly, "Don't ask. Not now." His personal electric vehicle waited outside, driverless. He entered, input a private authorization code, and the vehicle immediately began heading toward Aurora Skyways' temporary command hub, just 12 minutes from the international terminal. As the car weaved through internal lanes, Chancellor's eyes never left the onboard screen showing live security footage from Flight 471. Every cabin had at least two angles. He muted the audio. He didn't need sound to understand, because the looks in Maya and Malik's eyes said everything. The way Maya gripped her phone, the way Malik sat upright, trying to stay calm under pressure. The moment Clarice Jordan stepped forward, and the way Heather Sloan masked her unease behind performative authority. He tapped a special button, activating an emergency communication line with the flight operations control room. No name introduction. His voice rang through the command center. Seats 2A and 2B on Flight 471. Status report, now. The controller didn't dare hesitate. Two underage passengers were ordered to leave their seats. Dispute currently ongoing with flight lead Heather Sloan. Airport security involved. No physical removal yet. High-profile passenger has intervened. Name, Clarice Jordan, Federal Human Rights Board. Incident recorded. Tension level, escalating. Chancellor Holt said nothing for 3 seconds. Then he spoke. Halt boarding. Seal the doors temporarily. No one is to be removed from that plane without my approval. Anyone who disobeys will be suspended immediately. Confirmed, the coordinator answered, voice trembling slightly. And one more thing, Chancellor added, voice dropping. I will be on that plane in 10 minutes. All cameras must keep recording. No one is to turn off a single device. The vehicle glided past the final checkpoint, entering the executive-only route to the tarmac. When it stopped, Chancellor didn't exit like a man heading into a meeting. He walked like someone stepping into a battlefield where the enemy didn't yet know they had already lost. Meanwhile, aboard Flight 471, the atmosphere had shifted from cold to choking. Heather stood stiff, clipboard against her chest, her face draining of color as the internal system flashed a new command. Cease all passenger handling. High-level oversight is intervening. Await further instruction. Clarice Jordan noticed the change. She looked at Heather, at Briggs, and said quietly, Someone's watching from above. And I hope you understand, these eyes aren't the same as they used to be. Not the kind that lets you quietly push someone out of their seat. And no one ever knew. Heather said nothing. She stepped back, as if waiting for someone to come to her rescue. But the cabin was filled with a strange silence. A silence that told everyone the tide had shifted, even if no one said it aloud. Maya whispered to Malik, Dad's coming. I know. The way everything stopped. It's like something bigger than policy just entered the room. 5 minutes later, the airplane door opened. No music. No welcome aboard announcement. Just a man in a long coat stepping onto the plane with slow, measured steps. Not rushing, but not waiting for anyone's cue. Every eye turned toward him, but no one recognized him right away, except Heather. Heather backed up the moment she saw his face, then muttered under her breath, Oh, God! Frank Delaney squinted. That's... no way! Briggs and Carson stood abruptly, startled. Carson almost snapped to attention out of instinct. Clarice Jordan smiled faintly, as if she had known this moment was coming. Chancellor Holt walked straight to seats 2A and 2B and stood before his children. I'm a little late, he said softly, voice low and calm. Maya didn't smile. She only nodded, her eyes slightly red. Malik let out a long breath, as if all the fury inside had finally been uncorked. Chancellor turned. His eyes settled on Heather, not angry, not vengeful, but like a professor eyeing a failed exam whose student had answered the first question completely wrong. Flight lead Heather Sloan, he said, addressing her by title. Heather gripped her clipboard, stammering, I didn't know they were... And that, he interrupted, is the most telling part. You didn't know, but you chose to act as if you knew everything about them, based solely on their skin, their age, and how poorly they fit the mold you're familiar with. Heather opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. She understood that every word now was a nail in her career. Chancellor turned to Briggs. And you are? Briggs, airport security. We were just following notice from the flight lead. And when a flight lead violates protocol, do you have the right to refuse? Briggs froze. It's easy to place blame on higher-ups when the truth comes out, but it's far harder to defend justice while it's still hidden in the dark. He looked to Carson. You hesitated. That's far better than blind action. Remember that. Carson nodded, said nothing, but his young face seemed freshly washed of collective shame. Frank Delaney stood. I didn't realize this would turn into a public tribunal, but I have the right to— You have the right to remain silent, Chancellor said, and if you wish to speak, do it in a place where discriminatory behavior is examined under a microscope. I'd be delighted to host you at our passenger council hearing this Friday. Frank sat down, face flushed as if slapped by words. Chancellor turned back to the cabin. This flight will continue after I leave, but the following individuals will not be joining it. Heather Sloan, immediate suspension. Briggs, under investigation for unverified intervention. Frank Delaney, added to watch list, barred from flying first class on any Aurora flight until reassessment. To the remaining passengers, I apologize on behalf of the company, but I also hope those who stayed silent today remember how that silence felt. He looked back at Maya and Malik. You never have to apologize for your presence. Remember, pride doesn't have to shout, it just has to stand. And then he walked off the plane, never looking back, never needing confirmation, because real power is when you can be silent, and the world still has no choice but to listen. Flight 471 did take off, but the air inside was no longer that of an ordinary commercial journey. It became a temporary vessel, silently carrying the aftershock of an incident even the witnesses themselves hadn't fully processed. Heather Sloan disappeared without a word of farewell. Briggs never returned to the cabin, and Chancellor Holt, like a shadow of authority that had swept through every layer of pretense and judgment, had left. But what remained was an air so dense it felt almost sentient. In a control area of the airport, just 2 corridors away from where the plane had lifted off, 2 rooms were activated simultaneously, but they were nothing alike. Not in furniture, not in atmosphere, and certainly not in purpose. The first room, Aurora Skyways Emergency Disciplinary Chamber, held only 3 people: Heather Sloan, an internal company lawyer, and a compliance supervisor. Heather sat upright, but without the arrogance of someone used to managing situations. She hunched slightly, as if even the chair beneath her was beginning to question her. No handcuffs, no blinding lights. But the questions were sharp as blades, precise as needles. Why did you instruct 2 passengers to leave the plane when they had valid tickets and proper documents? The supervisor asked. His voice wasn't raised, but it was razor-thin steel. Heather blinked, her eyes already dry, struggling to hold composure. They couldn't produce valid ID. I was following standard flight security protocol. But another passenger in first class, Mr. Frank Delaney, was also not asked for ID at that time. Why wasn't he instructed to deboard? Heather stammered. Because he's flown with us many times. I recognized him. So if I fly often and I'm white, I don't need to show ID? But if I'm black and a teenager, I get removed? That's not what I meant, Heather said softly. But your actions said exactly that, and the video confirms it. Heather went silent. Sweat began to bead along her temple. The internal counsel beside her remained quiet. She knew there was nothing left to defend. We need you to sign a full written statement. You are hereby suspended, effective immediately. A formal internal investigation will follow. Heather took the pen, but her hand trembled so badly the first stroke of ink looked like a child learning to write. She was no longer the confident flight lead who once prided herself on handling any escalated scenario. Now even the most basic framework of moral conduct had rejected her. Meanwhile, in another room, deep inside Aurora Skyways' private lounge, layered with soundproof insulation, Clarice Jordan sat with 2 teenagers, Maya and Malik. The room looked nothing like an interrogation space. Plush chairs, soft lighting, a pot of hot tea. And yet, what was happening here was a form of inquiry too. Just one built on compassion. Clarice had no recorder on. She didn't need audio to remember. She wanted to look into their eyes, feel each breath, every twitch. Because what these children had just endured wasn't just an incident, it was an imprint. And if handled wrongly, it could become a scar that lingered for life. Maya, Malik, I know neither of you want to be here, she began, and I don't want to be the one asking these questions. But if I don't ask them, the people who did wrong will keep thinking there are no consequences. Maya nodded. She sat upright, as if trying to keep her pride from cracking. Malik was silent, his eyes not angry, but watchful. When the flight attendants asked you to leave your seats, what did they say? Clarice asked, her voice gentle as wind. They didn't say anything specific. They just kept repeating, policy requires valid ID. But no one else was checked. There was a white man, no ID, and he stayed seated. Maya answered, her voice steady, unshaking. Did they lay hands on either of you? Number. But they stood very close. One security officer touched my brother's backpack. He clearly said not to open it. Maya continued. Clarice turned to Malik. Do you remember exactly what the guard said to you? Malik nodded, his first words since the conversation began. He said, don't play games. We have the right to search if needed. But he didn't say that to anyone else. Just me. Clarice took notes by hand, not on a device. She knew. When you write by hand, you think with your heart, and she wanted every word to pass through her heart before becoming an action. Were you scared, Malik? She asked, not out of formality, but humanity. Malik looked at her. Number. But I felt small, like it didn't matter how much sense I made, because they had already looked at me and made up their minds. Clarice remained still. She knew that sentence. Everyone who's ever been judged for their skin, their gender, their age, knew it intimately. It resonated like a shared heartbeat. Thank you both. You've been braver than many of the adults in that cabin, she said, placing her hand on the table. Not to touch them, but so they could see. Someone is here, truly here, not to judge, but to listen. Outside those two rooms, social media was erupting. A passenger from the back of the cabin, who had quietly filmed the moment Maya was told to leave her seat, posted the clip to Twitter with the caption, "This is what discrimination looks like, even in 2025. Black teens removed from first class for not looking the part. Their father walked in. Guess who he is?" The video was viewed 4 million times in under 3 hours. Hashtags like Machine Aurora twins, Josh First Class Justice, and most notably, Shashin who is their father, began to trend. Online news outlets published breaking updates. TV networks scrambled to pull up Chancellor Holt's background. And then somehow, CCTV footage from the cabin leaked, source unknown, showing the moment Chancellor Holt entered the aircraft, stood in first class, and looked at Heather Sloan with an expression so composed it chilled the entire room without raising his voice. Viewers didn't know who he was, but they immediately sensed, this is someone who doesn't need to announce himself for the world to freeze. And once they discovered he was the CEO of Aurora Skyways, this wasn't just a viral moment anymore. It became a cultural earthquake. Clarice Jordan stepped out of the room with Maya and Malik as the sun began to set. The late light at the airport cast a thin veil over every surface, beautiful but indifferent. In her hand was a handwritten page, filled with lines of violet ink that looked more like a personal journal than an official investigation memo. But every word was living evidence, not to convict anyone, but to preserve something deeper, trust. She hadn't sent a report, hadn't held a press conference, hadn't informed anyone from the senior management team. Because there was something she had to do first, before any formal record surfaced, called Chancellor Holt. 3 times, no response. 1 call was declined, 2 rang, and then went dead. Clarice frowned. That wasn't like Holt. Even as CEO, he'd never missed a single call from her, unless he was deliberately staying silent. Clarice tried again, this time calling Rachel, Holt's personal assistant. No answer either. Things were starting to taste like a planned silence, the kind that only happens when a major decision is being forged. Clarice sat in her car, no music, no emails. She drove slowly toward downtown, though she wasn't even sure where she was going. Her mind was racing. If Chancellor Holt chose to resign to avoid the media storm, who would protect Maya and Malik from getting hurt again? If he quietly stepped away, the public would only see a CEO offended on behalf of his kids, not a leader trying to change a system. And if he stayed silent for too long, the company would rewrite the story in the safest way possible, meaning they'd defend themselves and bury everything else. Clarice stopped at a lake overlook, pulled out her phone, and replayed the recorded conversation with the kids. She didn't re-listen to the whole thing. She skipped to one sentence from Malek. They looked at me and had already decided. She isolated that clip, titled the file, Judged. Then she sent it to Chancellor Holt with a single-line message. If you are still the leader I believe you are, then you cannot ignore this sentence. This line will save the company and save you from your own silence. 1 minute later, her phone rang. She didn't need to check the screen. She knew who it was. I'm listening, she said. On the other end, Holt's breath was calm but weighted. I'm in a place where no one can find me, and I need 5 more hours. After that, everything begins. But thank you for not letting this be rounded off. Clarice didn't ask where he was. She didn't ask what everything meant. She only replied, if you're about to become the storm, I just hope you bring enough wind. Meanwhile, back at the internal lounge, Maya and Malik had been cleared to leave the interview suite, but they didn't leave the airport. A young PR assistant named Lacey, assigned to manage optics, tried to cheer them up with pastries, drinks, and Netflix recommendations, but neither was in the mood. Maya just stared out the glass wall, watching planes take off. Malik scrolled nonstop, tracking the trending hashtags. It was he who discovered the video of Heather Sloan demanding they be removed from the plane had already hit over 12 million views. But more disturbing were the comments. Over 30,000 responses, split evenly between support and criticism. Some called them diva kids, spoiled rich teens. Others called them symbols of pride, disrespected. But the comment that made Maya freeze was, if they did nothing wrong, why hasn't their father spoken up? She handed the phone to Malik without a word. He read it, turned away. His eyes reddened but didn't cry. He only said quietly, if Dad won't speak, I will. Maya said nothing. She knew her brother wasn't the kind to step in front of a camera. But this wasn't about someone else anymore. Maya opened Instagram, switched to story mode, but didn't show her face. She recorded the airport window, the planes rising into the sky, and narrated in one take. We stayed silent, not because we were afraid, but because we thought the adults would know right from wrong. But today, if no one will speak, then we will. This isn't about seats. This is about dignity. It's about who gets believed and who gets assumed guilty just because they don't look like they belong. The clip lasted just 27 seconds. Maya posted it. No hashtags, no filters. But within 10 minutes, the video spread like wildfire. People clipped it with subtitles. Others edited it into montages of airport injustice. And one journalist from Chicago began calling the clip, Speech from the Window. At that moment elsewhere, Chancellor Holt was alone in his late mother's old study, a modest wooden home on a hillside where he had kept every item just as she'd left it. On the wall, a photograph of her standing among hundreds of black students, holding a sign that read, Education is Resistance, still hung perfectly straight. He looked up at that photo and opened his laptop. Not his emails, not internal reports. He opened a single folder titled Legacy. Inside were hundreds of recordings, photos, handwritten letters from former Aurora employees dismissed for being culturally misaligned. It contained crying, curses, apologies, and a 1-minute, 11-second video from 2021. An elderly Haitian man speaking in a blend of French and English. If one day you have power, remember this. A leader's silence is more toxic than a guilty man's scream. Chancellor replayed it 3 times. Then he stood, opened a drawer, and took out an old phone. A BlackBerry model he kept for when he didn't want to be traceable. He dialed not the board, not the press, not Clarice. He called Rachel. Send this message company-wide, he said. I'm holding a national address tomorrow morning, but not at headquarters, at the airport. Where exactly at the airport, sir? At the boarding gate where my children were told to get off. Dallas International Airport was unusually crowded that morning, not because of a holiday or the weather, but because of an internal message sent across the entire Aurora Skyways system at 5:44 a.m. It contained just 3 lines. CEO Chancellor Holt will address the public at 9 a.m. Location, Gate E-17, Dallas Airport. All staff encouraged to attend or watch online if present on site. No ID required. 3 lines, but the aftershocks were enough to trigger alarms across the legal, media, investor relations, and operations departments. Clarice Jordan was the first to arrive at the airport. She brought no files, wore no uniform. She carried only a small USB drive in her coat pocket and stood quietly at the row of chairs near gate E17, the very place Maya and Malik had been pulled from their seats the day before. The seats hadn't been replaced. The LED board still displayed a normal flight schedule, but no one was looking at that. Everyone, from security staff to lead attendants, focused on one thing: the center of the concourse, where a small wooden podium had been set up without clearance from any official event coordinator. No backdrop, no flags, no professional sound rig. Just a simple microphone plugged directly into the airport's intercom system and a small nameplate already placed atop the podium: Chancellor Holt. At exactly 8:58, a black Cadillac pulled up. The back door didn't open by a driver, but by Chancellor Holt himself. He stepped out with no bodyguards, no CEO badge, no suit. He wore a wrinkled white shirt and light blue trousers, a combination his mother used to say made him look like a college professor. Under his left arm, an old laptop. In his right hand, a thin bundle of documents tied with cloth. He didn't look at anyone, didn't nod, didn't wave, but the entire space seemed to freeze the moment he walked in, as if every gaze was recalibrating itself toward the one man who didn't need a badge to enter a restricted zone. Clarice stood. Their eyes met for exactly 1 second. No words, no signals. Both understood. This was not the time for justification, nor the time to rescue reputations. This was the moment to stop and allow justice, long delayed, to finally step in. When Chancellor Holt stood behind the wooden podium, he didn't adjust the mic. He didn't scan the room for cameras. He simply opened the laptop, placed it on the podium, and pressed play on a recording. In the silence of that airport, like the hush of a chapel, the voice of Malik Holt echoed, the same words he had spoken to Clarice the day before. They looked at me and had already decided. No one spoke. No one moved. The voice of a 17-year-old boy reverberated through the terminal, each breath sharp and uneven. When the recording ended, Chancellor Holt raised his head. He didn't read a speech. He simply said, "I'm Chancellor Holt, the current CEO of Aurora Skyways. But today I'm not here as an executive. I'm here as a father of 2 children whom you decided not to believe because they didn't look like what you're used to seeing in first class." He paused. No one interrupted. He continued, "I'm not here to sue anyone. I'm not calling for anyone to be fired. But I will do one thing: abolish every informal policy that allows employees to assess customers by appearance. The flagged at gate system will be dismantled permanently, and every person here, including those who remain silent, will be invited to join a new program: Dignity First, a mandatory bias recognition and service behavior training initiative." Murmurs began to ripple, but Chancellor did not stop. "We once prided ourselves on being the first airline to offer a citizen class, but today I realize a seat does not define dignity. It's how you look at the person sitting in it that determines whether they're seen as worthy. And yesterday, we failed." A flight attendant began to cry. A technician slumped into a chair. A passenger filming for TikTok stopped recording. Chancellor looked straight into a reporter's camera, knowing full well that every word he spoke would be cut, clipped, reinterpreted, but he chose to speak anyway. "I'm not here to punish. I'm here to begin. Tomorrow, Aurora Skyways will shut down its entire system for 12 hours, for the first time in history, so all 67,000 employees can listen, understand, and publicly discuss racial bias and the right to be present. This is not a marketing campaign. This is a moral commitment, and it starts here." He tapped the podium gently. Not dramatic, not theatrical, but the sound carried farther than any applause. Clarice Jordan stepped onto the stage, stood beside him. She pulled the USB from her pocket and inserted it into Chancellor's laptop. On the LED screen behind them, once displaying flight information, appeared a single line: "Yesterday's silence was complicity. Today's voice is the beginning." No one prompted applause, but clapping started, scattered at first, then swelling. Not because they were watching a CEO give a speech, but because they had just seen a man brave enough to use his power not to protect himself, but to admit wrong and set it right, at the very site where wrong was once hidden behind protocol. When Chancellor Holt stepped down from the podium, he didn't leave right away. He walked toward a row of chairs where Maya and Malik were waiting. There was no dramatic embrace, no tears, just a father placing a hand on each child's shoulder, then saying one sentence. Yesterday, I didn't answer the phone, but today, the world heard you. News of Chancellor Holt's speech spread across the media in less than 6 hours, but not everyone stood by him. When a black CEO uses his power to call out an entire system, there will always be forces in the shadows looking to make him pay. Less than 48 hours after the press conference at Gate E17, an 11-second video surfaced on the social network X, formerly Twitter, spreading with the caption, "These are the victims everyone's talking about?" The footage, pulled from a terminal hallway camera at the airport, showed Maya and Malik laughing as they pushed their luggage carts through the waiting area, appearing carefree, with no visible signs of distress or humiliation. An anonymous account called @airline facts only reposted the clip with the tweet, "Seems like the discrimination crisis CEO Holt mentioned was just a performance." A few hours later, a senior reporter from a neutral financial newspaper published a lengthy article suggesting the E17 incident may have been a media strategy to cover up an incoming scandal involving CEO Holt's alleged abuse of power to appoint family members. The hashtag #Holt hoax began trending. Aurora Skyways stock dropped 11%. On television, pundits debated, could this be a coordinated stunt between the liberal press and a CEO exploiting racial issues for personal gain? Inside an emergency meeting room at Aurora headquarters, Clarice Jordan placed her laptop on the table and played the original video. She said nothing for the first 20 seconds. Then she opened a metadata file extracted by the legal team. The viral clip had been cut from a 3-minute video, which included a moment where Maya, visibly shaking, asked a security officer, "Can you call my dad? We were pulled out like criminals." Chancellor Holt didn't respond immediately. He asked just one question. Who was the first person to access the original file after the incident? A tech employee replied, "Supervisor Dawn Ellison from Flight Security." She requested temporary admin access, claiming she was compiling an internal report. Clarice raised an eyebrow. "And has that access been revoked?" "Yes, but she emailed a copy to her personal account at 2:44 a.m. Chancellor stood up and left the room without another word. He knew this wasn't a matter for meetings anymore. It was a matter of evidence. At the same time, in the temporary crisis communication office set up to manage the fallout, a staff member discovered a chat log from an anonymous account sent to a far-right blogger. "If you can push this clip to go viral, I'll make sure you get an exclusive interview with one of our reporters tomorrow." The sender? An internal IP address, traced to a device on the 12th floor, accessible by only 3 employees. One of them, Dawn Ellison. Clarice walked in. She didn't ask questions. She simply raised a printout of the metadata, along with a forged email bearing a digital signature that matched Dawn's workstation. The room fell silent. An hour later, Dawn was suspended, but not yet terminated. Internal investigations required full transparency and due process. However, within 24 hours, a former employee who had once worked under Dawn posted an audio recording. She once said, "If anyone needs to be made an example of, it should be a black CEO. Let's see if anyone dares to act big after that." A formal investigation was launched. Dawn denied all accusations, but security footage revealed she had personally inserted a USB drive into the system's main server at the exact time the video was edited and extracted. In a press statement, Aurora's spokesperson affirmed, "We don't protect titles, we protect the truth. That includes holding even senior supervisors accountable." The narrative began to shift. Media outlets that had previously criticized Chancellor Holt started retracting their articles. The hashtag #Holt hoax was exposed as a coordinated disinformation campaign. Within 12 hours, a new hashtag, #We Hear You Holt, climbed into the top 5 nationwide trends. In a brief press conference, Chancellor Holt said only one thing before walking away. "When a lie requires an entire system to protect it, but the truth only needs a single USB drive, you know that system is too weak to survive." Dawn Ellison was prosecuted for evidence tampering and internal data breach. But the greatest damage wasn't to one person's career. It was the erosion of trust felt by thousands of employees who believed they were working in a just and equitable environment. That night, in Maya and Malik's bedroom, the two children sat watching the restored original video being replayed on national television. Maya looked at her brother and softly asked, "What do you think would have happened if they hadn't found out the video was fake?" Malik responded quietly, his eyes fixed on the screen. "We'd be the liars in our own story." 36 hours after Dawn Ellison was suspended, Aurora Skyways entered the most dangerous phase in its corporate history. Not because of public outrage, not because of customers, but because of the board of directors. Closed-door meeting, no live stream, no junior personnel allowed inside. 13 people sat at the table: the board chair, major shareholder representatives, legal advisors, and two of the quietest people in the room, Chancellor Holt and Clarice Jordan. The meeting didn't start with a greeting, but with an accusation. "Mr. Holt," came the dry voice of Julian Crane, chair of the Internal Investment Board, "are you aware that the incident at Gate E17 has caused Aurora's market cap to drop by $1.4 billion in just 72 hours? Chancellor didn't answer right away. He scanned the room, his gaze counting every skeptical look, every restrained sigh behind a stiff collar. "I'm aware," he said, "and I also know that if we don't address the root cause, we're going to lose another $10 billion in the next 12 months. Another board member jumped in. "But you had no authority to speak publicly as CEO without PR approval, especially on an unmonitored livestream platform." Clarice gently placed a printed document on the table. Decree 47, passed by this very board 2 years ago, granting the CEO emergency powers to act in situations threatening senior leadership integrity or customer safety. Chancellor looked directly at Julian Crane. "You don't think two black children being dragged from their first-class seats while their parents weren't even notified qualifies as an emergency?" No one responded. Chancellor stood. He didn't ask for permission. "I'm not waiting for another vote on a media containment strategy, because this time, we don't need containment. We need counterattack." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. "This is what Clarice and I have spent the last 3 years developing. It's called the Williams Protocol." Clarice spoke for the first time. Williams was the name of Aurora's first black pilot, terminated for refusing to fly when he found a mechanical failure in the engine. That was in 1991. They called him uncooperative. 2 years later, the same engine caused a crash in Colorado Springs. 13 people died. Chancellor opened the folder. The Williams Protocol is an internal ethics and equity auditing mechanism, authorizing the CEO to restructure the decision-making chain when the system is found to be compromised by racial, gender, or status-based bias. Julian Crane shot up from his chair. "You're insane. Who gave you the authority to demand a structural overhaul of a system built on 40 years of financial achievement?" Chancellor didn't back down. He held up a detailed report in front of everyone. The number of black executives at Aurora, 0, for 17 straight years. A system with no representation for 42% of the U.S. population is not a success story. It's stagnation disguised in silk ties and performance bonuses tied to silence. Julian's teeth clenched. "If you activate that protocol, the board will immediately vote for your removal." Chancellor smirked faintly. He pulled out his phone, opened the press conference video from Gate E17, and cast it onto the large screen in the room. He hit play. 43 million views, millions of supportive comments. Then he opened another folder. Resignation letters from 11 senior managers, already signed, all of whom were under Dawn Ellison's direct supervision. Julian collapsed back into his seat. No one moved. Chancellor spoke slowly. "I don't need consensus to activate the Williams Protocol, because this system, if it can't reform itself, will be reformed by the public. The only question is, will you be inside or outside when that happens?" A board member finally spoke. "We can demand a cross-investigation to verify the protocol's legality." Clarice responded, calm and firm. "The protocol was embedded within the Emergency Personnel Clause during the pandemic, passed by this very board in 2020, as a contingency for humanitarian and cultural crises. The clause remains in effect unless unanimously revoked, CEO included. Silence. Chancellor delivered his closing line. I'm not threatening you. I'm reminding you, if an airline cannot protect its passengers, it does not deserve to take flight. He walked out. No one stopped him, because power sometimes does not need to be granted. It only needs to be proven to have existed all along. Friday, 9:42 a.m. Within less than 12 hours after Chancellor Holt's closed-door boardroom speech was leaked, the entire American social media landscape was flooded with a phrase never before seen: number sign Williams Protocol. It wasn't just the name of an internal reform policy. It became a new symbol. For those who had once been pushed out of first-class seats, had their names mispronounced, or were told to wait at the back of the line even though they'd arrived first. And the most surprising part? The first people to speak out weren't politicians. They weren't celebrities. They were airport employees, janitors from terminal floors, flight attendants who had left the industry years ago, people who had once been told, stay silent if you want to keep your job. One anonymous Twitter account, claiming to be a former Aurora Skyways baggage handler, posted the following. I was once warned that if I gave priority baggage status to 2 black passengers, same as first class, I'd be written up. I stayed silent. I was wrong. I'm speaking now. Attached to the post was a photo of an internal memo, complete with date stamps and an official file code, bearing the line, staff are not permitted to offer special accommodations beyond the approved priority list. Special note, do not assign priority to tags containing sensitive racial indicators. The post was shared more than 3 million times in just 6 hours. At the same time in Denver, a small press conference was held, organized not by activists or legal teams, but by former Aurora employees. They were once trainees in the airline's flight attendant program, but had been cut in round 3 for not fitting the brand image. A young woman stood at the mic, wearing a plain button-up shirt. Her voice trembled, but her eyes never looked down. I stayed silent when they said my hair wasn't refined enough. I changed my hairstyle. I bought British-style heels. I used lightening cream. I tried everything, only for them to tell me I still lacked the aura. I didn't know what aura meant until I realized they were just trying to turn me into someone else. No one in the crowd spoke, but the cameras were rolling. The live stream on TikTok hit 1.2 million views by noon. Her name was Kia Mendoza, a straight-A graduate in aviation services, once the lead student ambassador for orientation events. But she was never formally hired. The official reason was staffing realignment. But according to 4 other trainees from the same cohort, the real reason was she was too different. Meanwhile, at Aurora's Dallas headquarters, Chancellor Holt's personal assistant received over 14,000 emails within 48 hours, most of them expressing gratitude. But one stood out. It came from an unnamed sender with a single line. If you still believe in the decency of people, find the file of Dave Wilkins, worked night shifts at Warehouse 3 back in 2009. He saved a flight attendant from being fired and got reassigned to cleaning bathrooms without explanation. Chancellor didn't reply, but the very next morning he showed up at Warehouse 3, unannounced. Inside, only 3 employees were on duty. He asked directly, "Who here has been working since 2009? A middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and a worn reflective vest hesitated. "That would be me, but I don't think I—" Chancellor didn't let him finish. He asked one question. "Do you remember a young woman named Marcia Rivers?" The man froze, then nodded. "She was an intern, got caught eating a sandwich in the stockroom, accused of stealing food. But really, I'd left my lunch for her. She didn't have money for food." Chancellor nodded. "You didn't sign the report because you wanted to protect her, and you got reassigned." The man gave a bittersweet smile. "I didn't think anyone knew." Chancellor extended his hand. "I knew, and now the whole country will." The video of Chancellor shaking hands with Dave Wilkins was uploaded to Aurora's official account with the caption, "Some heroes wear no uniform, but they make others keep theirs." The wave of stories could no longer be contained by media strategy. It didn't need hashtags. It didn't need PR gimmicks. It only needed the truth, and that truth was now being spoken aloud in the voices of those who were once told to be quiet. Internal meetings began erupting across other major airlines. United Airlines launched a review of complaint dismissal rates by neighborhood demographics. American Airlines announced it would audit its airport staff training programs to ensure no geographic or cultural bias. But the boldest move still came from Aurora itself. They launched a public website, auroratruth.org, allowing all former employees to anonymously share any past unjust experience. The site promised no retaliation, no censorship, and no submissions would be used for termination evidence. In just 24 hours, over 6,000 stories were sent in. One person shared how they were pressured to change their name to something easier for international guests to pronounce. Another wrote about a failed interview because their voice didn't sound regionally standard. And one simply wrote, "They once called me excess baggage. I am not baggage, I am a person." Saturday morning at LAX International Airport, the early sun poured gently down the decon course, calm and unremarkable, except for a single sign placed near boarding gate 14 that made many travelers stop in their tracks. It wasn't the size that caught their attention. It was the message, just one sentence. This seat was paid for. So was the dignity that came with it. Beneath it was a photo of two boys, Malcolm and Ezra Holt, smiling in their high school uniforms, seated neatly in first class. No one knew exactly when the sign went up. There was no airline logo, no branding tagline, but just below, a small QR code led curious viewers to a new official Aurora Skyways site, auroraforward.org. Not a page for booking tickets or tracking flights, but a place to tell stories that were once erased from the record. That day, Chancellor Holt did not appear in the polished suit most CEOs would wear after a corporate crisis. He wore a plain dress shirt, no tie, and boarded the plane like any other passenger. No entourage, no press crew. Yet the entire flight crew rose to greet him as he stepped into the cabin. Not because they were told to, but because they wanted to. Chancellor didn't sit in seat 1A. He walked to row 3, two side-by-side seats, currently empty. His two sons, Malcolm and Ezra, were waiting there. For the first time since they were pulled out of first class for being black and not looking like they had tickets, the boys were finally sitting in their rightful seats without needing to prove anything. No employee ID, no printed confirmation, no defense from their father, just the silent presence of justice restored, and the quiet feeling of being allowed to sit where you already paid to be. On that flight, not many words were spoken, but when the aircraft lifted off, the captain came on the mic, not to recite safety instructions, but to say one short sentence. Today, every seat is first class because every passenger is treated like a human being. The cabin erupted in applause. A middle-aged man in the last row wiped tears from his eyes. A white mother hugged her daughter tightly, and a young Asian boy whispered to his mom, "Mom, that's the twins from the story, right?" She nodded, and the boy added softly, "I'm glad they didn't stay quiet." When the plane landed in Seattle, the site of the upcoming launch event for the new Dignity Miles program, Chancellor did not disembark through the priority lane. He walked with everyone else, through the standard gate. But this time, there were no suspicious glances, no murmured whispers. No one asked, "Do you have a ticket?" They knew who he was. More importantly, they knew why he did what he did. The launch event was held outdoors, no glamorous backdrops, no booming microphones, just a small wooden podium and a few rows of chairs. Chancellor didn't deliver a long speech. He simply shared an old story about a flight when he was 10, traveling with his mother from Baton Rouge to New York. Their seats were switched last minute because those seats weren't eligible for their fare class. His mother, a black woman in a plain dress, simply said, "Don't argue. You need to learn how to live like someone who stays quiet." Chancellor didn't understand it then, but he remembered. And years later, he broke that silence, not with anger, but with action. At the end of the ceremony, a group of high school students walked onto the stage. They were the winners of the National Essay Contest, If I Had a Seat. The winning essay was read aloud by a nervous young girl from Milwaukee. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "If I had a seat, I'd want to sit next to my grandmother. Because she never sat in a seat with a seatbelt. Because she moved through life by waiting in lobbies, by holding standing room tickets, by pausing at nameless stations. If I had a seat, I'd want to give it to those who've never been allowed to sit down. The entire crowd rose to their feet, not out of politeness, but because something deeper had been awakened. And perhaps the strangest thing is this. No one could remember exactly where that flight had taken off from or where it was going. They only remembered seats 3A and 3B, the ones that had once symbolized exclusion, but now stood for the rebirth of dignity. Seats no longer meant to flaunt power, but to be given back to those who had once been denied. Aurora didn't need a PR campaign. The story had already spread like a whisper, carried by passengers, by employees, by children who saw themselves in the eyes of Malcolm and Ezra. And from that moment on, they no longer felt like excess passengers. You may have never sat in first class. You may not be a CEO or the child of someone famous. But if you've ever been judged by your appearance, looked down on because of the way you speak, the color of your skin, or simply because you didn't look like someone who belonged there, then that seat represents you too. And if you've ever stayed silent in a moment when you should have spoken up, ever regretted not standing by someone who was being hurt, or ever wished someone would be brave enough to tell the truth, then this story isn't just about the Holts. It's about all of us. Because justice doesn't always require a courtroom. Sometimes it begins with a seat that was denied and ends with the world learning how to treat each other all over again. If this story made you feel lighter, angrier, more grateful, or simply inspired you to be better tomorrow, leave a comment, share it, and subscribe to the channel, because every single subscription is a way of standing up for fairness, for dignity, and for those who were once told to stay silent. Thank you for staying until the end. And if life has ever handed you a seat, don't forget to offer it to someone who's still standing.